So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Robert Rosenthal. I'm a board member of Catchlight and a journalist, longtime journalist. And this, Carlos.
I'm Carlos. Hello, Carlos Ortiz.
So today we're going to talk about something called the Ferguson effect, and a project that Carlos has been involved in now for well over a year, almost 18 months. And just, there was supposed to be a third speaker here, is Dr. Sid Martinez, who's a PhD, a sociology professor at the University of San Diego, who had a family emergency and couldn't make it. But really this project started in a way with him. So I'm going to speak and introduce what he was doing, and Carlos will tell you how they hooked up. But in 2014, Dr. Martinez was part of a project called Cops and Clergy, which was looking at the relationship in Sacramento between the police and the clergy, and how you create trust in a community that was really had endemic violence, especially around youth gangs. And he was part of this project working with the police and the clergy, and then bringing in the community in 2014, 2015, 2016, which turned out to be quite successful because trust was built. And as an academic, he was not only doing great research and bringing these communities together, but keeping data. And one of the data points they had was, I think, about 85 youths who had been involved in criminal activity as part of this project. After about a year, only about 15 of them had had any arrests or being charged after having criminal history. So the project really worked, and it was about building trust. And then Carlos, you met Sid, and what happened?
So I met Sid at an urban sociology conference at Yale. I was showing my work from Chicago. This is one of the images. I spent 15 years documenting youth violence, the resilience of youth violence on families, and that was like my long-term project that took me 15 years to do. I also made a film during that process, and I was showing the film at Yale, and I heard Sid talk about his work in Los Angeles, and I was like, wow. And then he saw my work, and we grabbed a beer together at the hotel, and then we talked and stayed in touch, and a year and a half later, I find myself, Sid got a grant to do research data, and then he wanted to also make a film, and we started talking, and that year I applied for the Catchlight Fellowship, and I didn't get it. I was a finalist, but I didn't get it that year, so reapply if you don't get it. And then the following year, things just came through, and we were in the process of working on this documentary already, and then the shooting with Stefan Clark.
Yeah, so what happened here is and this is a really example, and Ida was talking about storytelling, and as a filmmaker and photographer, you were really deep in this story already for 9 months, and then in March, just about a year ago, Stefan Clark was shot and killed. And you had already been deeply involved in the community. What happened then? Because you were looking at one story, you were building up trust, and then this incident of a young black man being shot. He took a cell phone out of his pocket, he was shot 8 times, he was shot and killed. So how did that change what you were doing and impact the work?
Yeah, so he was shot in his grandmother's backyard, and us being there before really helped, being in the community and getting to know people. And then all of a sudden, all these activists that we met, pastors that we talked to, like Pastor Les, and we kind of were going out with the police as well, because Sid had access to the police department. All these things kind of came together at the same time after Stefan Clark was shot.
So, as a filmmaker, journalist, photographer, you're in the middle of your story, you're on the ground, and we're going to show you, tee it up. You want to explain what we're about to show, because I think one of the challenges here for Carlos is you're in a community and you're developing trust and relationships, and Sid really had created a lot of the groundwork. And then this incident happens, which is really just shatters everything.
Yeah, so Sid and I were figuring out, I'm obviously the director of it, but Sid became the producer of the film because he was actually in the field talking to folks, hooking up the, what it takes to go out and shoot. And most of us as photographers are playing the role of directors and producers and editors, obviously after you finish your project. So I'm gonna show you guys, we can look at a trailer from the film that I'm still working on, and I'll talk about the process of working on it. So if we can turn this light down, please, and roll it.
4000 Norwood, 6 Henry, yellow X-ray 297. We have the info. You got your gun on you?
Yes, sir.
That's a mistake.
Proceed south on everyone. First unit to him. I've got 2 more running into the court to the west.
Law enforcement and enforcing the law is really just a small piece of the pie when it comes to overall community health. And so that we also have to understand. People of color are overrepresented across our judicial system, our prison system. It's a cycle. These are historical issues going back to, the slave era and all that. And you look at this, and unfortunately, some of these people of color, through no fault of their own, are ignorant to this cycle. I would say per capita, there are less job training, less counseling, less services for people of color in these poor, low-income communities. Yet, where do parolees get released to, right? When they get out of prison, they have to go back to where they committed the offense. And so, here we go, this cycle continues.
Community outrage still surrounding this police video showing them pursuing a man suspected of breaking into cars and smashing the window of a house. Officers believed that Stephon Clark had a gun, but after shooting him, realized he didn't.
I hope that we can just show love to each other and just come together like this for no reason. It shouldn't take a death for us to just show love to each other. That's why they can kill us now. Because we all by ourselves until somebody dies.
The amount of shots and the fact the media will not say that this is not black versus white, this is right versus wrong. One of the officers were black, and we are still standing out here together.
Stephon Clark, Stephon Clark, Stephon Clark. Today at the press conference, we made sure his family wanted us to say his name, never forget his name. Now, of course, we didn't want to have to remember that young man's name this way, but we're going to say his name over and over and over again. Stephon Clark, Stephon Clark, Stephon Clark.
There's no training that can prepare you to come into our communities and police our communities. There's not a training. The only training that it is experience and living there and going through it.
So, as a journalist, one of the most challenging things is when you start a story, you're not never sure where it goes, and you really don't want to have any kind of assumption about what the story will be. In your case, I know that, so Stephon, you're in the community working for 8 months, 9 months, Stephon Clark is shot, and then you have a reaction, protests, and then another shoe to drop is whether the police officers will be charged, which they were not. And, if you follow the case, the DA in Sacramento decided not to prosecute, as did the California Attorney General. Now the Justice Department might do something. So as a filmmaker and storyteller, how does this affect the process of what you've had to do? Because this has gotten really, it's gone in ways you never could have anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it doesn't really affect the process. I mean, I'm there to react to what I see and feel, and really the way the story gets told. So you just keep asking questions, you show up when there's events that are taking place that you need to talk about. You show up when there's not events that are taking place. You show up to church and all the little minutiae that happen in life. And then you kind of assume for an outcome in your mind. You say, is this going to happen? Are people going to riot, or are people going to protest peacefully? To me, it doesn't really matter. It's the reaction that takes place that I need to react to,
Well, part of this project and the idea was to look at the Ferguson effect, and two outcomes of the rioting in Ferguson, Missouri a few years ago. The so-called Ferguson effect is the obvious lack of trust in the community towards the police. And then the other outcome that academics and others who've studied is the police don't want to be too aggressive, or they cut back on how aggressive they might be because they don't want to, create another outcome that's a riot. So they sort of back off, and one of the outcomes of backing off is that violent criminals, who they're well aware of, become frequently more aggressive, so crime goes up. Have you seen that, the Ferguson effect, as a result of the shooting?
Well, to backtrack, I was in Ferguson when Ferguson was happening, and what I saw in Ferguson was that, weeks into it, the police weren't coming around Campfield, where Michael Brown was shot and killed. The police stopped patrolling that area, and there was a guy who I was walking around with and talking to, and he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm up here. This is my community, yada yada yada." And he had his gun on him, and he was like, "Man, I tell the shorties, the kids on the block, what to do and what not to do and how to, behave. But now we got to patrol the streets." And I was like, it reminded me of Chicago, again, where I grew up and spent time working, and the talk that takes place of well, we don't need the police. We can patrol the streets ourselves, and we can police ourselves. And that's a really deeper conversation, than the 40 minutes that we have. So I won't get into it, but when Sid called me and was talking about the Ferguson effect, it made me really think about that question: if what happens to the community when the police are not involved. And I think what actually happens is that the community stops really engaging with the police, and they handle issues themselves within the margins of your block and your community. And a lot of that happens in Chicago as well.
So again, we're both sorry Sid's not here, but one of the things we did want to talk about was sort of the unique partnership, really, between an academic who had gained trust and worked in that community with both the police and the clergy and community, and how that either benefited or maybe hindered. I'm not sure it ever did, but what that relationship was like as an artist, filmmaker, journalist.
Yeah, for me it was great because Sid, I could immediately go work there, in Sacramento. A place that's not my community, like Chicago, So Chicago, I grew up there. I know how to work there. Not that I don't know how to work anywhere else, because I worked in different countries around the world. But I knew that we had immediately a place to go, and I listened a lot to Sid, and kind of just kept telling the story the way I felt it, and the similarities between Chicago and Sacramento. So.
And has your access changed or been hindered or hurt by the shooting, or either with the police or the community, and how's that evolved?
No, I think my access, I mean, the community was really active and ready for this reaction, to go out in the streets and protest and try to change laws on the books that exist. And they're really pushing for it now. So there's a lot of pressure on police officers, and the police officers themselves know that. They're trying to change community engagement within the police department. But the problems that they're facing still exist, right? So an officer told me once that, like, he's like, which is like something typical you hear, but he said, we're out to do our job and patrol the streets, and people need to really change the laws through government in order for us not to be expected to do X, Y, Z.
So with your access to the police, even the opening scene there where the guys are picked up and he says, you have a gun on you, and the guy says, yes, sir. And he goes, that's too bad, says the cop. I mean, what kind of, I mean, did you expect to get that kind of access? And have you been surprised by anything by spending the time you have with the cops?
I mean, I'm always surprised because I usually, I'm on the other side of the tape if I'm out photographing a scene. So yeah, it's something different, you know. It's a lot of the people that the police end up pulling over are on probation. So I would say about 90% of the community that we were in with when the police were working in El Paso Heights, they were under police surveillance. They were under probation for 5 or 2 years or 10 years, you know, depending on who it is. So once you're under probation, you lose your right to be searched.
And what, I know one of the key characters is a...
I'm sorry, you lose your right to say that you don't want an officer to search your car because you sign your 14th Amendment right.
Right. Isn't one of the key characters a police officer who is from Sacramento, from one of the neighborhoods, and how important, or...
Oh, yeah, so Roman he's been there for a long time. He's actually from Fresno, where Sid is from. So they have this long-term relationship because they grew up, two Mexican brown brothers that grew up in the same kind of barrio, the same kind of environment. And they met through cops and clergy. He's a lieutenant who's helped us have access to the gang unit. And so the gang unit that we were with, actually, they pull a lot of people over who are actually poor and really can't afford to keep their cars up. And they don't really issue tickets. Like their job, they tell you, like, there's cars that don't have like expired registration for 2 years. And they're like, we don't care about your registration. We just want you to, you know, not have a gun in the car. So, and they tell you we're going after guns. So, you know, that's
one of the things also we had talked about is that you, as much as a police community relations thing, this story is about economic inequality. Can you talk a little bit about that and how what you're trying to show
about the
economic
inequality?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's 3% in this neighborhood in the El Paso Heights, 3 to 2%, depending where you are in the poverty rate. So that's pretty high. And there's the landscape. It's something I always kind of look at when I'm photographing or filming. It's very important to me to talk about the landscape because that's your environment. That's where you live. That's where you wake up. That's the way you communicate in a bigger sense and what you're inspired by when you wake up every day. So when there's trash around your neighborhood, when you're living in conditions that your government doesn't really pay attention to, like there's a lot of homelessness in Sacramento. So these issues are coming up. People are talking about them, and it's part of the effect. Besides the Ferguson effect, right? Besides the question of the Ferguson effect, it's the effect that it has on your psyche when you wake up every day.
So are you still, again, as a former reporter and editor on sometimes very big projects, as the story keeps shifting, which it has dramatically here with the Stephon Clark shooting, how is this really complicated what you're doing, or does it pushed it out, or at what point do you think I'm done? I'm now going to get in the edit room?
It's what complicated the shooting part of it?
No, just how do you tell this story now?
You just keep going back. I mean, the editing room is where everything happens. It's the place where you shape the story. You see what it's the symphony of the film, right? It's the symphony of showing your work to the public. Not everything that takes place would work in an edit, so it's really just, to me, it's not really about the data or the Ferguson effect, right? It's about how you communicate your voice to the people that are going to see a film or a photography project.
So do you?
And that comes through, right? That would come through within the work if you focus on telling the story, telling the heart of the story, the empathy, the love, the resilience, what's in people's hearts.
Yeah, just if we're also going to throw this open to question in a couple of minutes if you have any questions. But so I keep pushing on this because I'm trying to help figure out, because I don't know what you're thinking right now, is do you feel like the story is done, that you've finished it in terms of getting in the edit room, or in your own mind you have to continue? Because one of the issues right now that's out there, again, as a result of this, is in California, they're trying to push legislation which would change, which may be a positive outcome, the whole question of use of force by police, and when they can actually be permitted to fire. Right now, you literally can shoot somebody if you're trying to arrest them and they've committed a felony as they flee, or if they come at you, and they're trying to basically say change it only if you're under a police officer feels like he's in imminent danger or his life or her life is threatened. So are you waiting to see what happens with that, or are you still going back and shooting, or where are you?
Yeah, I mean, if I had $100,000, I would. So if there's anyone that has wants to support the film, but it just depends on the access of money that I have to keep going back and back. So right now I'm thinking of the decision of finishing it, but I'm waiting. I'm just waiting around to see what happens. And Hoop Dreams, the movie Hoop Dreams, it was a 3-hour-long movie, and I think it took 15 years to shoot. But Hoop Dreams, the first 20, 30 minutes was a film too, so you can think about it that way. It really depends on your access to funding. But then you make a film with what you had. This film started with like 20 minutes. It was going to be a short. Now it's moved to 40, between 40 and a feature. And that's something I usually don't talk about, but it's good to hear the process of it.
Okay, does anybody have a question? Or I can't really see.
Are we the intended audience for your movie? And do you have an intended audience for your movie? Does that shift how you put the work together? What tone of voice do you address? Do you use? And
yeah. I mean, to me, the intended audience is everybody. You always get this question from funders, and I don't mean to bust chops on funders, but it's kind of a little bit of a naive question. It's like, are you going to bring it back to the community? And the community knows this better than I do, better than you do. We know this, right? Being Black people of color, Black and brown folks who go through this or who've grown up in these situations. And the best reactions I've had is taking it to places where film festivals where I've been, that people have no idea that this takes place either in Sacramento or in Chicago or in the South. So I think my intended audience, to answer the question, are people outside of the community, and it's a great way to engage.
So when you said what takes place,
when you're trying to show?
I mean, you mean the engagement, the engagement.
The engagement between
between the viewer and between the film and the viewer.
And what do you want them to take away from that?
Well, I mean, my heart's open and my vision is open, so I think it's up to the individual to make their own decisions, you know. I really can't change people's minds. I think we just have to keep an open mind and think about other worlds.
So in a sense, you're
filmmaking does that.
And you're taking people to a place where they may never go and meet characters they'd never meet.
Yes, okay. I believe so. If it's documentary film or a narrative film, if it's fiction, you always want to pull somebody. Even, you know, photography does that. Black and white images do that. You know, you escape your daily routine. You sit down and watch a film for 15 minutes or an hour, and that's what our job as visual artists is to do.
Okay. Any other questions?
You gotta raise your hand because we can't see you.
Hey, Carlos. So I was wondering if there are specific instances where scenes or either stills or video that you shot that specifically demonstrate the Ferguson effect, if you saw that in Sacramento or not. I'm still I'm a little fuzzy on that. Like, the New York Times Magazine did a cover story, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, on Baltimore and how things have really broken down between the police and the citizens. And what was really fascinating about the article, maybe more fascinating than the article itself, was they assigned the story to Peter Van Ashmel. And if you look at the images in there, there's a lot of them are really interesting, but one, for example, showed caution tape around the front lawn of a house. It was all African Americans that were circulating, and then there was a white policeman that was further down the sidewalk on the other side of the tape. And it really looked like, he was completely outside of, this situation, and he looked sad, even though it's police caution tape. There was another photograph that was in a car, and where you always see ride-along photos where you get the police's view. Actually, this photograph showed the policeman up alongside another car of these citizens, and they were looking at the policeman really skeptically, so it looked like it's now the vantage now belongs to the citizens, and it's ambivalent at best. So I'm just wondering, what you captured in particular, or if you saw this effect, and then in what particular ways did you capture it?
That's a long question, brother. I mean, I can't. I don't know. To me, it's not a visual thing. It's a thing that you probably can answer in little segments. You know what I mean? So it's a great question coming up and asking, this question that a police chief started in St. Louis, the Ferguson effect. But it's also too, to me, it's not a question you can visually answer, through photographs or film completely. Do you know what I'm saying? You can't it's more of a question to the audience. It's more of a question to ourselves. Like if these things are really taking place, and that's trust between people in the community and policing.
Well, but did you see trust? I mean, you've been there since the shooting a lot. Have you seen that question come up, or that whole question of just trust completely erode and the police backing off, or any of the officers you were filming or had access to before the Stephon Clark and since?
I mean, again, it's not like this is historically like a long topic, right? It's not like these incidents. I think the question that we asked was kind of we were poking at the work that's been the question that's been raised, right? And it's a longer it's a longer term question because now laws are starting to change. You know, I can't really say like this is the answer to.
But did you have characters you were filming or had access to who've either their position is evolved or changed dramatically because of the Stephon Clark shooting? I mean, you followed it, and how do you how do you explain that, or how can you tell us about that?
Well, visually, I can't explain to you and say like, oh, if I narrate it, I can explain it to you. Right, but when you're doing ethnographic work, when you're doing documentary work, it's difficult to like get a character. I mean, Evan said it right there in the trailer. You can't come into our communities without living here and knowing how to police it. So that's an example of it, right? And these examples get thrown at you over and over and over. They're not like, they don't directly answer the question, but in other ways of trust and policing, those questions get answered time and time again. You just have to like really think about what people are telling you. And Evan said it in the trailer, and the protesters are saying it by resisting and protesting and closing off highways, and changing the laws, hopefully.
And I mean, one of the things do
you follow me though?
Sort of.
Are we
Yeah.
Are we getting over
Well, I think what you're saying is you want to be, in a sense, a mirror. You're not trying to impose what you are, who you are, on whatever is happening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're not supposed to impose
right
who we are. I mean, asking a question and interviewing people. It's very important to listen to what people have to say to you without really poking at what you want to convey in an interview. And people do say it. If you're patient and you wait, people will answer those questions for you.
Well, when you came back, I mean, I would think, maybe not true, that after Stephon Clark is shot, I mean, it's like a jolt of the worst kind of thing that could have happened within the characters, the storyline you were pursuing. I mean, it's everyone's worst nightmare. I mean, and how that either immediately shifted what you were doing or gave it a lot more juice and energy and either fear, rage, anger, whatever emotions you felt and saw and witnessed.
Yeah.
Which of those did really, what came to the fore after that when you came back?
What came to the what?
The fore, what was the thing that you really saw?
I mean, to me, to be honest with you, it's something I've witnessed before. So what came to me was I saw this community coming together to really go out and protest and react.
And did the police change in terms of their access to you, or how much time were they just open?
Oh, no, the policing part of it has been really open.
So they weren't trying to hide anything, or what did they say about it when you were dealing with the cops about what happened with Stephon Clark? Did they ever voice an opinion, or?
Not really. No, they just. I mean, the policing we're waiting for the DA's decision to take place.
And how much
it's very almost by the book in a way. I mean, here's the conversations we had, which actually freaked me out because I'm 43. I grew up in the Bill Clinton era where brothers like me were getting arrested for weed, and then friends of mine were getting records, police records, and then seeing this cop pull over this woman. She had I think it was 20 pounds of weed, like she was dealing. And 2 years ago, she would have had a felony record on her. She would have been locked up for a long time for having that much weed, right? So being a witness to a change of law that's put friends of mine in jail, people of color in jail for a long time, and ruined their lives, now they're being, people are being treated differently because it's legal to.
Did they arrest her or just let her send?
No, she got a ticket. They confiscated the drugs because they thought, they thought she was dealing, but he couldn't really prove it. Yada yada yada. But it just the fact of that being there and witnessing that, to me was like, wow, this is pretty crazy.
We assume, I guess, and it's bad to assume anything, that the community has fear or resentment towards the police and authority. I think that's a fair assumption, I guess. But did you witness or capture that kind of feeling of fear, whatever you would describe it, from the policing point of view when you spend time with the cops?
Did I witness the fear?
Their fear, their feelings.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who are very polite with the police, and the police end up being polite with them. And then this unit went into these projects, and this guy was in his car, and he was like, "Why aren't you doing this in your neighborhood? Why are you harassing me?" And he was talking back to them, and he was right. You know what I mean? And he's like, "Why don't you have a gang unit in these other neighborhoods and patrol them the same way?" So, so you see that as well. You see that reaction to it.
But do you see the fear on the part of the cops, and do they even respond to that? That sense, why aren't you? That question.
Yeah, I do like the body language of the human. I see the fear, but that's my interpretation of body language, right? Between just being in a car and driving and seeing people's faces, right? The reaction between a police car and people on the streets and the police themselves. But those are things that are not translated. This is what visual media does. You can't translate that into words on a script. So I do read that, but that's my interpretation of that fear.
Are there any other questions?
Hey, can you hear? Okay, perfect. What do you want your legacy to be with this work?
Well, not just this work in particular, but the work that I've done. For some reason, I want to do different work, but I keep getting pulled back into my community. I just really want to add empathy, empathy to my people and people of color, and that's the legacy of my work, is to show evidence of a time that existed. For example, Trump speaks about Chicago, and I've been working in Chicago for 15 years, and he speaks about the boys who got arrested in New York, the Central Park 5, and those guys are my age, right? And there's evidence that didn't happen, and it didn't, right? These boys were wrongly convicted. So I think as journalists, as photojournalists, documentarians, visual artists, we have to have evidence before these issues take place, and then when they take place, we can show you that most of the stuff that people like agitators like Trump are talking about is bullshit, and that's it. That's what I want my legacy to be, I guess.
Okay, we just got to sign the wrap-up. Carlos will be available to answer more questions, as well as his book will be available later, called We All We Got, which is about Chicago. So I want to thank you all. And
part of, if you purchase a book, part of it goes back to Catchlight. So
that's a good cause. So we want to thank you, and look forward to watching this film when you finish it. Good luck.
you.
Thank you.